into it. So hello, everyone. So in today's webinar, we are going to be exploring how to improve communication with yourself and others by cultivating a deeper sense of self-awareness. And as kind of what I mentioned when everybody first joined, just as a heads up, so these webinars are recorded for educational purposes. So if you do prefer to remain off camera, we understand, and the chat function will always be available. Just during the presentation, it's not necessarily visible, but we will be able to connect with you throughout the process. And afterwards, there will be a question period. So before we begin, let's introduce ourselves. So my name is Ayesha, and I'm a psychotherapist and registered social worker at Shift Collab. I provide support to primarily racialized adults navigating cross-cultural issues, interpersonal relationships, and mental health challenges.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elena, so I will be helping co-facilitate this webinar today. I am also a registered social worker and psychotherapist here at Shift Collab. So I provide support to adults residing in Ontario and Manitoba regarding perfectionism, self-esteem, personal development, and stress management. And I'm just really excited to be here with Ayesha today to talk on the topic of self-awareness, as it is really an important piece that can often get overlooked in personal development. And there will be a question period near the end. So if things come up, definitely take note of them, and we will try to address all of them with the time constraint that we have today. So you may be wondering, what is Shift? So Shift Collab is an integrated mental health firm that offers therapy and training across Canada. We have a team of over 100 therapists and 12 support staff nationally. Shift offers support to over 5,000 individuals for therapy and has led around 300 workshops and trainings in the past 2 years. So Shift designs and implements large-scale mental health care solutions and education programs like Maple Therapy Services and EAP alternatives. So Shift really does strive to continue to make mental health accessible and continues to work towards this goal every day.
So here's just a little overview of what we're going to be going through in today's webinar. So we're going to start off with exploring certain concepts like self-awareness and emotional regulation before we dive into certain tools like mindfulness, meditation, and journaling. And then lastly, we're going to explore how do we improve communication with others to best meet our own needs.
Okay, so diving right into what you folks came here for, which is the grand topic of self-awareness. So we are curious to hear from you, as you know, we may all have our own understanding and perception of the topic. And so I'm curious about what words or phrases come to mind when you hear self-awareness. And there's no wrong answers, more just an opportunity to get a sense of, well, what's the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear that? And feel free to use the chat function. And maybe Ayesha, if you can kind of say out loud which ones are coming in, because I can't see the chat at the moment.
Yeah, of course. I'll mention any. So one individual named Jay said self-talk is what comes up. And that's a great point, because when we think about self-awareness, that really highlights our inner narrative, what's going on in our inner dialogue. Charlotte mentioned mindfulness, and that's also a great point, because a huge point of mindfulness is being present. And so being present with ourselves is a huge concept of self-awareness. Danielle, our coworker and colleague at Shift, mentioned being in tune. And that's also a great point with self-awareness, is that to be in tune with our own emotions, our thoughts, our feelings, it's all together. Ilda, another one of our colleagues, mentioned self-awareness for me is usually confusing, as my perfectionism speaks louder sometimes. Okay. So she's glad she's here. Thank you. We're glad you're here too.
Yes. Wonderful.
That's a great point, Ilda, because we definitely understand that with perfectionism, our inner critic can be super loud sometimes. And this is a good opportunity to learn some tools to develop that positive self-talk and really focus on what we actually need, versus sometimes our inner critic can also focus on our fears. Mm-hmm. Elena, do you want to get on to exploring a little bit more about self-awareness?
Absolutely. So I do want to thank everyone, though, for sharing, because I do hear a general theme regarding within and internal. And that's absolutely right, because when you think of self-awareness, it's a lot of inner work. And the most important conversations you'll ever have when you begin to expand the self-awareness are the ones with yourself. So when we talk about self-awareness, we are referring to how dictionary.com defines it as the conscious knowledge of our own character, feelings, motives, and desires. So, individuals who are self aware carefully choose their words. They understand how to utilize their strengths, but are also aware of their weaknesses. So, they're also able to consider the perspective of other people, and they're more attuned to feeling empathy. So, self awareness can serve as the driving factor that motivates you to become a better version of yourself by recognizing areas that may be holding ourselves back. So, self awareness is a key contributor to communicating with ourselves and with those around us. It is really a lifelong learning process, and your ability to create and hold space for this does become easier as you progress through life. So, for example, consider the change in your self awareness from where you are currently at, and then maybe to a younger period in your life. So, say 16. So, however, it is true that we can naturally start to increase self awareness. It does take a conscious effort to put it in practice and see the change. So, what happens if there is an absence of self awareness or even less self awareness? And what can actually happen is, for example, let's just say you come from a household that you've been shamed for showing specific emotions, and you were led to believe that, you know what, suppressing emotions was how to go to proceed through life because emotions are not good and I shouldn't be feeling them. But this suppression can result in a lot of confusion. It can result in anger outbursts, lashing out, and inability to communicate or understand what is going on within. So, this can create challenges in terms of forming lasting relationships. However, this isn't permanent. There's always an opportunity to create space for those thoughts and emotions. So, another big sign that someone might not be conscious of their actions is when an individual engages in repetitive behaviors that maybe aren't necessarily benefiting them, and they have frequent thinking patterns that might be making them feel worse. So, building that connection with yourself is going to take time, and it's absolutely valid to feel frustrated or even uncomfortable. So, as you know, you are asking yourself these really tough questions and unlearning behaviors. You are entering this unfamiliar territory. But Aisha and I are here to reassure you this is a normal feeling, and you're going to hear this a lot from me today. But what would happen if you lean into that discomfort? And so, how can you become more self aware? So, here's a list of some suggestions on what you can start to do even after today's webinar. So, really start to look at your thoughts, feelings, and emotions objectively and just be curious about them. Ask yourself why you're feeling, behaving, or thinking a certain way. Try to unpack your biases, your triggers, or things that maybe have set you off in the past, but maybe you're not necessarily sure why you've had strong reactions to it. I do recommend keeping a journal so that you can track patterns, see if maybe there's a reoccurring theme with these really strong emotions. Think about your strengths and weaknesses. Think about your childhood experiences and what made you happy back then and why. And set aside time to look at yourself as a person and a leader. Reflection can be really uncomfortable, and I really want to acknowledge that. And it's not easy to reflect on parts of ourselves that maybe we don't like or have hurt us, but being self aware can change the course of how we approach situations in the future. So, when we practice self awareness by engaging in different activities and exercises, the more you begin to identify with what is at the core. So, when you're able to have a stronger, more conscious awareness, you may start to observe benefits associated with it. So, for example, maybe there's some improvement in your relationships by recognizing unhelpful behaviors and healing previous wounds. Maybe you're starting to notice you're able to communicate better with those around you. Maybe it becomes easier just to understand other people. There might be more clarity of thought, improved decision making, a better ability to attend to what you may need in that moment. Also, in general, having better emotion regulation skills. And I'm going to pass that over to Ayesha, who will expand a little bit more on that.
So going into emotional regulation. So this is one of the benefits that Elena just mentioned for self-awareness. So what exactly is emotional regulation? What are we referring to when we're talking about this? So emotional regulation is the ability to manage and process your emotions, whether they present as mild or intense, in a healthy way. So emotions are vital. They're little bits of information that really tell us a lot about ourselves. So it's good to pay attention to them. They can alert us to our values, our perception of ourselves, experience, our needs, sometimes our likes and our dislikes. I know we oftentimes find ourselves in situations, responding to certain situations very automatically, whether it's a person, a thing, or an interaction. But emotions are automatic, they are reactive, and how we respond to them is also very automatic too. So this then brings us into how do we break this emotional autopilot with a guided thought process and using the wheel of emotions. So to start off, breaking autopilot. In order to process these emotions, we need to figure out, what am I feeling? What exactly is going on right now? And it's important to note that words like good, fine, or okay are not emotions, but they're a good start. So it's important to start thinking about what feelings are actually coming up. See what arises and observe it without judgment. And they are uncomfortable, but it's good to just know and identify what's going on. And keep in mind that emotions are neither bad nor good, they just are, and they just exist. Elena will also be elaborating further on a tool that we use called the Wheels of Emotions, and that helps you with this step in identifying what's actually going on. The next step would be, where do I feel it? Notice where in your body do these emotions come up? Is it the throat? Is it the neck? Is it the hand? Is it the chest? This can also be really helpful in figuring out what emotions are coming up, especially if you're having difficulty with the first step as well. Even doing a head to toe body scan can really help you identify where it is in your body. And this will be another tool that Elena will touch on as she speaks about the wheel of emotions too. So the third step is, why am I feeling it? When we all know emotions are very sneaky, they're not necessarily rational, but they do come up in very random times. Sometimes it's in the present, sometimes it's in the past, sometimes it's a trigger that we can't even identify in the moment. But just don't worry about it, in the sense that if you can't figure it out, it's okay, because it doesn't change the fact that it's not valid or relevant. It's important to continue to observe these emotions without judgment. And then the last step is, what do I need? Well, here's the catch. So we all know emotions can be difficult feelings, but in order to address them, we do have to feel them, not just intellectualize them. We have to actually feel them. I know we often look for shortcuts through distractions, achievements, through people. However, we are the only ones who can feel those emotions and learn to control them. So it's also important to add that self-compassion moment in this. We have to be patient with ourselves and acknowledge that emotional literacy is an ongoing practice. And the more that you can name your feelings, the more that you can respond rather than react. So again, you might think, why should I feel my feelings? Well, when we release our emotions, we also release their hold on us. So as you start to practice these steps and incorporate, how to break this emotional autopilot, you'll start getting a better notice of what's going on, what mixture of feelings are coming up. It might not just be one, rather than the obvious ones you tend to focus on. The emotions have layers, there's depth to them, and they come from somewhere. And so this will all help you get a better understanding of why you're thinking and acting the way you do, and also learning to observe it without judgment and recognizing that emotions just are. And now when you have all that information, you can choose what you can do with that information.
Yes, so going off of what Aisha was discussing on how to break the autopilot and identifying what you're feeling can really help you understand your emotions and where they come from. So it's not like we said that we want to erase intense emotions, but instead we want to be able to process them in a healthy way, because all emotions serve a purpose. So on the slide, you are seeing this emotion wheel. And so this provides a visual of the core 7 emotions that most folks feel like, they can easily identify. But at times, people often hide behind these emotions. And so the next time you feel a strong emotion, I really do encourage you to reflect on this and even use the wheel. You can find this easily on Google if you just search up emotion wheel. And it really is helpful, especially for folks who maybe haven't been as comfortable with their emotions. They're just starting out trying to identify what they're feeling. And so, let's just say, for example, you feel a sudden wave of sadness. Dig a little deeper. Why do you feel sad? So, for example, maybe at the core, you are actually experiencing, if you look within the blue category, you're actually experiencing guilt. Maybe something happened yesterday and you're still holding on to that emotion, but it's manifesting itself as sadness because it's easier to identify it that way. So, when we are better able to understand why we're feeling that way, we're getting to know ourselves better and we're expanding this awareness on how can I meet my own needs. And so this brings us into our another piece. What we're going to talk about is mindfulness, which is another technique to expand our self-awareness. So, mindfulness is one activity that I really do like to encourage all my clients to even test out, just see how that feels, because it can really help manage our emotions and build that connection to ourselves. So, mindfulness essentially involves paying attention to the present moment. Taking note of what experiences are in that moment, with openness, curiosity, and a willingness to be with whatever is here in the moment with us. Meditation is a type of mindfulness activity where the main goal is to practice a heightened state of awareness and focused attention. Mindfulness is actively working that muscle in your brain that is all about noticing what arises and breaking that autopilot that we may fall into. And more people are incorporating mindfulness into their daily routines because they're also starting to notice the benefits of a heightened awareness to their body, the environment, and their thoughts. And so on the screen are some examples of mindfulness activities, but due to the time constraint, while we would love to explore and test all of these out together, we're not able to do that, unfortunately. So I wanted to make sure that these are on your radar should you want to try them out on your own, and I really do encourage it. For the first four examples, you can find guided recordings on YouTube, but starting with the first one, a body scan. So, a body scan involves scanning your entire body from head to toe, but not changing anything, really just observing what sensations are present here. And, some folks like to sit on a chair, lay down, whatever's most comfortable for you, but really just noticing, what's happening in my body. Do I feel tightness in my chest? Am I feeling sore today? Do I feel really warm? What you're doing with a body scan is just kind of reconnecting with your mind and body, especially if you've been on autopilot the whole day and you haven't really had a chance to check in with yourself. The second one is leaves on a stream. I love this one. One of my personal favorites, this is one I use with my clients all the time. So this is another mindfulness approach where you're using visualization, and essentially what it's helping you do is practicing tolerating uncomfortable thoughts and emotions by visualizing these thoughts passing through you, not taking control over your body. And I know if this is the first time you're hearing this, it might sound a little weird. And it really takes a couple times to practice through and even envision these thoughts flowing through your body, especially if you've never done that before. And so if that is something you're interested in doing, I highly encourage you to check that out. Another one is a walking meditation. And so essentially, this also breaks the autopilot because what you're doing is you're actively thinking about the actions required for walking. So, when we think about walking, that we're rarely thinking about the steps. So what this does is it just really slows everything down, and you're assessing these slow, deliberate steps as you notice all the sensations that are here. Mindful breathing is ways just to get you grounded in the moment and help regulate your system. And then we have journaling. And so I know I get some mixed messages when I hear journaling. And so I'm curious, maybe Ayesha can just help me with this. Do folks here journal? What is your experience with journaling?
We got Ilda in the chat saying that she likes the 5-minute journal, short, sweet, and to the point.
Ah,
We
love that.
have Joseph, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, saying that they journal every morning and every night. Danielle mentioned that she loves a good list of thoughts to give herself on a visual of what's going on in her head. Amanda mentioned she tries, but it's not necessarily her favorite.
Okay.
We have quite a few people who have dabbled in the journaling
Oh,
arts, we
good
can call it that.
stuff. I love that. I hearing, I'm journaling every day. I'm using the 5-minute journal just to get to the point. But then I have hearing also, I don't know how I feel about it. And that's okay, right? When we think about journaling, it's the act of writing down our thoughts and emotions so that we can understand ourselves better. And so when we think about, when I introduce this to my clients, I kind of hear the same thing like, oh, I don't know how I feel about it because this is like writing in my diary. And it can be if you want it to be, right? If you want to be free writer and just kind of put down what's on your mind, definitely do that. But it's also being able to understand ourselves better. So when we think about how can I use journaling to make myself feel understood, there's very different avenues. So when you think of journal prompts, if you're not sure where to start, this can be a really good avenue where you have questions already guiding this for you. Then we have list forms where this gratitude lists, checklists, bucket lists, just kind of maybe short and sweet to the point. We have asking yourself internal questions, sentence completion, maps and charts, but I also included guided workbooks. And the reason why I included that in here is because I know some of us might like having more structure. And so maybe trying to Google, journal prompts for self-esteem, and you're just getting so many questions, you don't know where to start. There are a lot of workbooks on Amazon, Indigo, wherever you want to go, that help make it more structured for you, and they have the questions all lined out for you. So there's, workbooks for anxiety, workbooks for depression, self-esteem, inner work. And so if that's something you're interested in, I also encourage you to check that out. But I did want to include an example of a journal prompt. So here is kind of a deeper one that can really get you reflecting on the past, perhaps identifying how the past can be influencing your current behaviors, but as well as assessing your progress. So if that's something where you're like, like I'd be curious to explore that. Yeah, reflect on this because there are so many different journal prompts that have kind of a very similar theme to it.
So now that we have unpacked a little bit more about how to be honest and communicate with ourselves, now we're going to talk about how do we communicate those needs and what is important to us to other people. So communicating our needs to other people, just as a statement for everybody to think about again and reaffirm, that doesn't make us needy and it doesn't make us selfish. It is just how we protect and prioritize ourselves. So let's consider the following few points in terms of how we can better communicate our needs to other people. So the first one being, be clear on what you need. So before you communicate your needs to someone, let's make sure that we know exactly what those needs are. Reflecting, like Elena was mentioning, using journaling or other techniques, even meditation can really help us look exactly what we're looking for. Consider what you think you might need and then dig a little deeper. Sometimes it might feel excessive, but being this straightforward and really reflecting on what you need before a conversation can be really helpful in decreasing any chance of misunderstanding. Now, the second point is communicate from a place of calm. Oftentimes, we're afraid to communicate because we're afraid to appear confrontational. We might already be in an emotionally heightened place. Maybe we're feeling hurt. But when we're trying to communicate in the most effective way possible, it's also good to take a pause, take a moment to ground yourself and or reschedule the conversation for a moment in time where both parties or all the parties are not stimulated emotionally in terms of heightened. So, you might choose a different time to talk about that conversation. It'll be like, hey, I'm feeling so-and-so. Can we talk about this conversation at this point in time so I can have the capacity to have that conversation? And the next point being avoiding placing blame on anyone. I know that when we feel our needs are neglected and we might feel hurt, it's understandable that it's hard to not place blame on another person or feel defensive sometimes. But if we come into the conversation ready to hurt another person unintentionally or intentionally, it might not create the change that you're looking for. So it's also important to create further boundaries in establishing your needs. This might create further boundaries in establishing your needs because now there's other issues in the communication you have with this person. So for instance, say you're talking to a partner and they might have done something that have hurt your feelings. So instead of cornering your partner and saying, you don't appreciate me, you could use I statements, which is a style of communication we're going to talk about a little bit more after this. And I statements clearly specify your needs. So you might be able to say instead, I feel that I'm not a priority in your life. I need to feel that you want to spend time with me. So the tone of both of those sentences are completely different, and they can directly impact how the other person is perceiving and retaining that information. So now going into I statements, they're a style of communication that focuses on feelings and beliefs of the actual speaker rather than thoughts and attributes of who the speaker is talking to. So they can contribute to positive and effective communication. So in order to build an I statement, there's a quick 4-step formula that we can start to teach ourselves and learn. This is very helpful when working through certain conversations, especially with clients and dealing with relational issues. How do we talk to someone about something, or how do we assert boundaries? This is a good way to sentence those or structure those sentences. So they can start with I feel, and that's when you write or you talk about what are you feeling inside, what emotion is coming up. When you is the second part, and that's when you describe the moment that you feel that. So what action, what occurrence made you feel that way? And then because is the why. Why do you feel this way? And then the last part is what you need. So share what part of you says what you need in that situation. So you have to identify what you need, not what you think the other person might need. And here's an example of an I statement. So for instance, you might say to someone, I feel hurt when you ignore me because it makes me feel like you don't care about what I have to say. Next time, could you please tell me if you're busy so you have time to listen, or if you don't have time to listen? And with these tips being said, though, there are a few other components when talking to other people about your own needs, or even just difficult topics in general. One being timing is everything. I know we touched on that earlier in terms of making sure you're not in an emotionally charged place when speaking about something, but it can be really vital in having effective communication. And the next one being just being ready for different answers. So this is where listening without judgment really comes into play, whether it's your own emotions or someone else's emotions. We can never know how another person might react to what we're telling them. So just try to listen to the person openly, try not to judge them or yourselves, and then go from there. So that actually brings us to the end of our webinar. So thank you for everyone for attending and for listening and having some open ears to what we have to say. We hope that you leave this webinar with at least a few ideas of how to cultivate that self-awareness within yourself, but also learning a few tools that you can use in the future to make that a little bit deeper and stronger. And just keep in mind, if you ever want to reach out to us or to Shift Collab or wanting to explore other options for support, please don't hesitate to reach us at info@shiftcollab.com. And I know we are reaching the end, but if anyone has a quick question, we're good to answer that quickly for you.
Yes, Danielle, how are we doing on time in terms of questions?
You're fine. We can definitely take a few.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So if anybody has a few questions, feel free to shoot. We're more than happy to answer those. Oh, I'd like to just say what's in the chat. Oh, there's some things going on in the chat. Julietta mentioned earlier that she finds that I need/want statements are very powerful when communicating what she needs in certain situations. It helps her get her needs met rather than expecting them to know exactly what they need. Jay mentioned that if there's a session like this every day, I would drop everything to attend it. That's so sweet. Thanks, Jay. Ilva also mentioned similar sentiments. And Daniel, thank you guys. Thank you, everyone. Oh, Charlotte had a question. Could you share tips about how to look at our emotions without judgment? This is a great question, Charlotte.
Yeah, I can absolutely take a stab at that one for sure. So one question I would ask, is what are you interpreting when you have this emotion? Why are we judging that emotion? The most important thing that we can really start to do when we start to feel these intense emotions is to understand that it's coming from a place of love. And so when we are feeling sadness, we're feeling anger, this is a really big component on self-compassion. Let yourself know that you are allowed to feel these emotions. They're very human. And when you proceed to go through the process of just reminding yourself that, and also challenging that part in you that is showing judgment. How old is that thought? How long have I held this judgment for having these strong emotions? And this is a very loaded answer. And I really do encourage you, this is where self-reflection can happen. And we also encourage you to work with a therapist to find out why you might be holding on to that judgment when it comes to that emotion.
Great answer, Elena. We do have another question from Jay. Jay is asking how to feel and process certain emotions when there's internal resistance.
Oh, do you want me to take that one?
Sure, if you want to go ahead, I can add to it if you like.
Oh, okay, you go first because I'm just trying to change something here.
No worries. So that's a great question, Jay. Thanks for asking the question. Internal resistance is a hard one because oftentimes there's some emotions that we don't want to feel. And I know a lot of us have gone through certain adverse experiences in the past, and sometimes even trauma that can lead us to suppress certain emotions. So it really comes down to kind of identifying what those emotions are. But when it comes to the internal resistance, I think that plays into working through some of those past experiences, because there are certain reasons why you have the resistance. And so then the questions are, where is that resistance coming from? When is it coming up? Is it with all emotions? Is it with certain emotions? Is it with certain situations? How often is it coming up? So you can get an idea of the frequency and the pattern. And then once you kind of figure out that source, and working through whatever the source is, it also comes down to, oh, sorry, I hope I didn't lose my train of thought. I got it. I got it back. It also comes down to connecting the mind and body again. Because I know a lot of times when we're talking about suppressing emotions and trauma or adverse experiences, we feel a disconnect because we have to do that to protect ourselves in that moment. So emotions or memory, whatever they might be, there's sometimes a disconnect between mind and body. And I think that's where the mindfulness tips that Elena and I talked about can be really helpful, because meditation can be really uncomfortable because you're just sitting there. You're just sitting there with whatever comes up into your mind. And it can be great, but it can be uncomfortable. But it's really training yourself to see what's going on in silence. With some music here and there, but also mostly the silence. And you just have your thoughts to really think about. And when you do that kind of consecutively and you start to build that habit, you start to learn a little bit more about where that resistance is coming from, and also how to start processing it and, reconnecting that mind and body aspect that may have become disconnected over time.
Mm-hmm. I think that was great. And I would also add too, this is also where journaling can come in. When you're thinking, why am I having resistance to this emotion? Is this my own voice, or is this someone else's voice telling me to have this resistance? But yeah, very great question. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think those are all the questions I'm seeing right now.
Mm-hmm.
So again, thank you so much everyone for attending our webinar. I shouldn't